When the 15-year-old boy, who had learned to survive by being invisible, watched the only man who had seen him in weeks get thrown from his motorcycle, he did not run. He did not fade back into the urban camouflage he had so carefully cultivated. He stayed. He watched the paramedics work, a knot of ice forming in his stomach. He followed the ambulance's flashing lights until they were swallowed by the city, and then he followed them on foot. For 3 days and 3 nights, he slept on the cold concrete outside the monolithic hospital, a lone, silent sentinel waiting for a man he barely knew to wake up. That single, stubborn act of loyalty, born from one small moment of kindness, was a spark in the darkness that would soon ignite a thundering firestorm of brotherhood, forever changing the course of his young, desperate life. The corner of 8th and Main was Leo's territory, though he owned nothing. It was a space defined by what it offered. The grimy overhang of a defunct check-cashing business provided meager shelter from the rain, and the bus stop bench was a place to pretend he was waiting for a ride that was never coming. The air was a constant assault, a thick cocktail of diesel fumes from the buses, the sweet, cloying smell of rotting garbage from a perpetually overflowing bin, and the sour tang of stale beer that seemed to emanate from the pavement itself. Leo was 15, but the streets had aged his eyes. They were the eyes of a much older man, wary and constantly scanning, cataloging threats and opportunities with a cold, detached efficiency. He had learned the brutal calculus of survival. He knew which dumpsters behind which restaurants were most likely to yield edible, if not fresh, sustenance. He knew the sound of a cop's shoes on the pavement versus a civilian's. He knew that kindness was a currency he couldn't afford, and trust was a liability that could get him killed. He had been on his own for 6 weeks. 6 weeks since he had finally walked away from the group home, where the older boys treated the younger ones like currency, and the staff looked the other way. Before that, it was a string of foster homes, each a different shade of neglect. He had learned one thing above all else. He was invisible, a ghost in the system. Now on the street, he had weaponized that invisibility. He wore faded, baggy clothes that helped him blend into the background, a human smudge on the periphery of other people's busy lives. People passed him by, their eyes sliding over him as if he were a piece of street furniture. He was not a boy to them. He was a problem to be ignored, a flicker of discomfort in their day. He watched them, not as people, but as a collection of movements. A woman clutching her purse tighter, a man averting his gaze, a dropped coin spinning on the sidewalk. Each was a data point in his survival algorithm. Then he saw the bike. It was a Harley Davidson, a beast of chrome and black steel that rumbled up to the gas station across the street with a sound that vibrated deep in Leo's chest. It was loud and unapologetic, the exact opposite of everything Leo tried to be. And the man riding it was just as imposing. He was huge, a mountain of a man packed into worn leather. A thick, gray-streaked beard covered the lower half of his face, and his eyes, shaded by a furrowed brow, missed nothing. His vest was a roadmap of his life, covered in patches. A large one on the back read, "Iron Sentinels MC," with a logo of a knight's helmet crossed by 2 swords. Other smaller patches dotted the front, a flag, a unit insignia from the Marine Corps, a stark memorial patch. This was not a man to be trifled with. Leo instinctively made himself smaller, pulling his knees to his chest on the bench. The biker, whose road name was Bear, swung his leg over the bike with a practiced ease that belied his size. He moved with a slow, deliberate purpose, the way men who are confident in their power often do. He filled his tank, then walked into the gas station's convenience store. Leo's stomach grumbled, a painful, hollow ache. He could smell the hot dogs turning on the rollers inside, a scent that was both torture and temptation. Bear came out a few minutes later with a hot dog piled with relish and a large soda. He sat on the curb by his bike, not far from Leo's bench, and ate. He didn't look at Leo, but Leo felt his presence like a change in atmospheric pressure. He knew the biker was aware of him. Men like that were aware of everything. It was part of their own survival code. Leo expected him to finish his food, get on his bike, and roar away. That's what everyone did. They took what they needed from the world and moved on. But the biker didn't. After finishing, he stood up, stretched his broad back, and then, to Leo's complete astonishment, he walked back into the store. He emerged a moment later with another hot dog, wrapped in foil, and another soda. He walked deliberately toward the bus stop bench. Leo tensed, ready to bolt. The biker stopped a few feet away, his shadow falling over the boy. He didn't say a word. He simply placed the hot dog and the soda on the far end of the bench, a good 5 feet from where Leo was sitting. He gave a short, almost imperceptible nod, not at Leo, but in his general direction. Then he turned, walked back to his bike, and mounted up. It was an act of profound respect. He hadn't treated Leo like a charity case. He hadn't made a show of his generosity. He hadn't forced an interaction or demanded gratitude. He had simply acknowledged another person's hunger and offered what he could, leaving the choice to accept it entirely up to Leo. He had seen the boy, not the ghost. Leo stared at the food. His heart was hammering against his ribs. He hadn't moved. The biker fired up his engine, the deep roar once again shaking the air. He did his checks, adjusted his mirrors, and prepared to pull out into traffic. That was when the world exploded in a screech of tires and a sickening crunch of metal. A beat-up sedan, its driver clearly distracted or drunk, blew through the red light at the intersection. It plowed directly into the side of the Harley just as Bear was pulling out. The impact was horrific. The bike was thrown sideways, and Bear was launched into the air, a huge, flailing shape against the bright afternoon sky. He landed hard on the asphalt with a sound that made Leo flinch, a wet, final thud. Silence descended for a half-second, a vacuum of disbelief. Then the screaming started. People poured out of the gas station, cars screeched to a halt. The driver of the sedan stumbled out of his car, looking dazed. Leo's training, his street-honed instinct, screamed at him to run. Trouble was here. Cops would be next. Getting involved was stupid. Getting seen was dangerous. He should melt away, disappear back into the cracks of the city. It's what he always did. But he couldn't move. His eyes were fixed on the still form of the biker lying in a growing, dark pool on the street. The man who had shown him kindness. The only person in 6 weeks who had looked at him and seen a human being worthy of a hot meal. A different instinct took over. Not the instinct of a survivor, but the instinct of a person who had just been given a gift and saw the giver struck down. A fierce, unfamiliar wave of loyalty and responsibility washed over him. He felt a debt. He ran. Not away, but toward the chaos. He was small and quick, slipping through the ring of stunned onlookers who were filming with their phones or just staring, useless. He reached Bear's side. The biker was on his back, his breathing shallow and ragged. His eyes were closed, and blood trickled from a cut on his forehead, matting his beard. "Hey," Leo said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Hey, mister." He didn't know what to do. He remembered a health class from a school he'd long since forgotten. Check for breathing. Don't move them. He put his hand near Bear's mouth and felt the faint, warm puff of air. "Hey, mister, can you hear me?" Leo's voice was shaking. "Help's coming. You just gotta hang on." He kept talking, a stream of useless but heartfelt words, trying to anchor the man to the world. He didn't know if Bear could hear him, but he felt he had to try. He had to do something. The wail of sirens grew closer. The police and paramedics arrived, pushing through the crowd with professional urgency. A cop tried to move Leo back. "Okay, son, let the professionals work." "I saw it," Leo blurted out. "The car, it ran the red light." He was just pulling out. The officer gave him a quick, appraising look, taking in the dirty clothes and the gaunt face. He probably saw just another street kid, but Leo's voice was clear, his gaze steady. The light was red for him. It was green for the biker. The officer nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "Okay, stick around. We'll need a statement." Leo watched as the paramedics worked feverishly on Bear. They cut away his leather vest, attached a neck brace, and loaded him onto a backboard. They worked with a grim, focused intensity that terrified Leo. As they loaded him into the ambulance, Leo overheard one of them say the destination: St. Jude's Medical Center. After giving his statement to a different, less interested officer who wrote down his name as Leo, no last name, he was dismissed. The world moved on. The tow truck came for the wrecked car and the mangled remains of the Harley. The street sweepers would come for the glass and the blood. The incident would become a statistic, a brief mention on the local news. But for Leo, it wasn't over. He looked in the direction the ambulance had gone, St. Jude's. He didn't know where it was, but he knew he had to go. He started walking, a small, determined figure against the vast, indifferent city. It took him hours. He walked until his feet were blistered, then took a bus he didn't pay for, ducking the driver's angry shouts. He finally saw the towering brick facade of the hospital just as the sun was setting. He walked up to the main entrance, a palace of automatic glass doors and bright, sterile light. A security guard gave him a hard look, and Leo knew he couldn't go in. He wasn't family. He was nobody. He was the ghost he had always been. So he found a place. A concrete alcove near the emergency room entrance, tucked away behind a large planter. It was out of the main flow of traffic, but offered a clear view of the doors. He sat down, pulled his thin jacket tight, and began his vigil. The first day was a blur of fear and exhaustion. Every time the ambulance bay doors opened, his head would snap up, his heart pounding. He had no food, no water. The hunger was a familiar companion, but the anxiety was new and sharp. He was waiting for news he had no right to ask for, about a man whose real name he didn't even know. The second day, the reality of his situation set in. The concrete was cold and unforgiving. The sounds of the city were replaced by the sounds of the hospital, the constant siren calls, the hushed, urgent conversations of doctors on smoke breaks, the sobbing of a family who had just received bad news. He felt impossibly small and alone. He saw a nurse come out several times to smoke. She was young, with tired eyes and a kind face. She glanced his way once or twice, a flicker of curiosity in her expression, but said nothing. By the third day, Leo was running on fumes. He was weak, dizzy from hunger, and shivering despite the mild autumn air. He had dozed off and on, but true sleep was impossible. He looked worse than ever, a crumpled heap of dirty clothes. The nurse with the kind face came out for her afternoon break. This time she didn't just glance at him, she walked over. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Her name was Sarah. Leo was startled. He scrambled to sit up straighter. "I'm fine," he mumbled, the automatic response of someone who knows that not being fine is a problem for other people. Sarah frowned. She'd seen him here for 3 days now. He never moved. He wasn't asking for money, he was just watching, waiting. "You've been here a long time," she said, her voice gentle. "Are you waiting for someone?" Leo hesitated. He looked down at his filthy hands. "The guy," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The guy from the motorcycle crash. On Tuesday." Sarah's eyes widened in understanding. She had been on duty in the ER when that patient came in. A bad trauma, polytrauma, the doctors called it. A severe head injury, multiple fractures. He was in the surgical ICU, in a coma. His prognosis was guarded. He's still here," Sarah said carefully. Leo's eyes, full of a hope so fragile it broke her heart, met hers. "Is he awake yet?" The question, so simple and so pure, hit Sarah with the force of a physical blow. This kid, this homeless, forgotten child, had been sleeping on the concrete for 3 days, waiting to find out if a stranger was going to wake up. "No, honey," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Not yet. He's resting." Leo's face fell, but he just gave a small, jerky nod, as if accepting a verdict. He curled back into himself, and Sarah knew she couldn't just walk away. She went back inside, her mind racing. She told her supervisor, who told the charge nurse, and soon a small group of nurses and aides were talking about the boy outside. They checked the patient's file. John Kowalski, age 48, known as Bear. No family listed. Just an emergency contact card tucked into his wallet. It didn't have a name, just a title. Styx, President, Iron Sentinels MC, and a phone number. Hospital policy was clear. They were only to contact listed family. A motorcycle club president was not family. But Sarah looked out the window at the small, huddled shape of the boy who had shown more loyalty than any family she'd seen in weeks. "Policy is wrong," Sarah declared to her colleagues. "That boy out there is his family. He just doesn't know it yet. And that man in the ICU, he needs his real family to know he's here." With a resolute nod from her supervisor, Sarah picked up the phone. She dialed the number on the card. A gruff voice answered on the second ring. "Yeah." "Hello," Sarah said, her own voice trembling slightly. "My name is Sarah. I'm a nurse at St. Jude's. I'm calling about one of your members, John Kowalski, Bear." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "What happened? Is he okay?" "He was in an accident. He's here in our ICU," Sarah explained. "He's stable, but he's in a coma." She paused, then took a leap of faith. "But that's not the only reason I'm calling. There's a kid here, a young boy. He's been sleeping outside the hospital ever since Bear was admitted. He's been waiting for him to wake up." The line was silent for a long moment. Sarah held her breath. "A kid?" the voice Styx finally asked, a new edge to it. "Describe him." Sarah described Leo. The thin frame, the dirty clothes, the watchful eyes. Another pause. Then the voice was low and resonant, like stones grinding together. "Don't let him leave. We're on our way." Less than 30 minutes later, Leo heard it. A low, distant rumble. It was a familiar sound, the sound of the biker's Harley, but multiplied. It grew steadily louder, a deep, guttural growl that seemed to make the very air vibrate. It wasn't one bike, it was many. He got to his feet, peering around the planter. What he saw made his blood run cold. A river of steel and chrome was flowing into the hospital's main parking lot. 20, then 30, then more motorcycles, all Harleys, all ridden by men who looked like they were carved from granite and leather. They parked with a military precision that was both impressive and terrifying. The thunder of their engines died down, replaced by the heavy tread of boots on asphalt. Leo shrank back into his alcove, his heart pounding with a primal fear. He had drawn the attention of the pack. They were here, and he was sure they were here for him. He had gotten involved. He had broken the first rule of the street. He was about to pay the price. The men gathered in the parking lot for a moment, a silent, imposing army. One man, taller and leaner than the rest, with a long, graying ponytail and a face like a road map, seemed to be in charge. He spoke briefly to the others, then started walking directly toward the emergency entrance. Directly toward Leo. Leo squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable. This was it. This was how it ended. Heavy boots stopped right in front of him. He could smell the leather and road dust. He forced his eyes open. The tall man, Styx, was looking down at him. His eyes were dark and intense, and they seemed to see right through Leo's fear, down to the bone-deep exhaustion beneath. Styx didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He slowly, carefully, knelt down, the leather of his pants creaking in protest. He lowered himself until he was at eye level with the terrified boy. "You the kid who's been waiting for Bear?" he asked, his voice rough but surprisingly gentle. Leo couldn't speak. He just managed a small, trembling nod. A strange expression crossed the biker's face. It wasn't anger. It was something else. Respect. Awe. He reached out a large, calloused hand, not to grab, but palm up, an offering. "Thank you," Styx said, the two words imbued with a weight of sincerity that stunned Leo. "You stood watch when we couldn't. You're a good man." Leo stared at him, bewildered. This wasn't the punishment he had expected. Styx's gaze softened. He saw the hunger, the fear, the exhaustion. "What's your name, son?" "Leo," he whispered. "Well, Leo," Styx said, rising slowly to his feet. "Your watch is over. We'll take it from here." He turned to one of his brothers, a burly man with the word Grizz tattooed on his knuckles. "Grizz, take Leo and get him some food, a hot meal, not from a vending machine, and a room. Get him a room at the Marriott across the street. Put it on the club card." Grizz nodded. "On it, Prez." He approached Leo not with menace, but with a quiet kindness. "Come on, kid. Let's get you fed." Leo was too stunned to resist. He was led away from his concrete alcove, past the assembled ranks of bikers, who watched him with expressions of solemn respect, and into a warm car. He was taken to a diner, where he was told to order anything he wanted. He ate 3 cheeseburgers, 2 orders of fries, and drank a chocolate milkshake so thick the straw stood up on its own. No one rushed him. They just sat with him, a silent, protective guard. Later at the hotel, they gave him the key card to a room that was bigger than any bedroom he'd ever had. They gave him a bag with new clothes, jeans, a sweatshirt, socks, underwear, and a handful of cash. For toiletries and stuff, Grizz grunted. I can't pay you back, Leo stammered, overwhelmed. Styx, who had come to the hotel to check on him, put a heavy hand on his shoulder. Son, he said, his voice firm, what you did for our brother, you don't owe us anything. We owe you. For the first time in months, Leo slept in a real bed, under a clean blanket, with a full stomach. He was safe. He was warm. He was not alone. And as he drifted off to sleep, he realized that the rumbling of the motorcycles, which had once sounded so terrifying, now sounded like protection. Bear woke up 4 days later. The world came back to him in blurry shapes and muted sounds. The first thing he saw clearly was Styx's face, haggard but relieved, by his bedside. Hey, brother, Styx said, his voice cracking. Welcome back. Bear's throat was raw. He tried to speak, but only a croak came out. He pointed at his bike jacket, which was draped over a chair. Styx understood. The bike's totaled, Bear, he said softly, but you're not. That's all that matters. Bear's mind was a fog, but one image fought its way through. A kid on a bench, a wrapped hot dog, the screech of tires. He looked at Styx, a question in his eyes. Styx smiled, a rare and beautiful thing. Oh, you mean Leo, he said. And he told Bear the whole story. He told him about the 3-day vigil, about the nurse's phone call, about the skinny, scared kid who had shown the heart of a sentinel. Bear listened, the fog in his mind slowly clearing. He remembered the simple act of buying a hungry kid a meal. He had done it without a second thought. He never imagined it would be returned 1,000-fold. A single tear tracked its way through the grime on his cheek. He cleared his throat, and this time the words came out, raspy but clear. I want to see him, he said. Leo was brought to the ICU. He was wearing the new clothes, his face was clean, and his hair was washed. He looked like a teenager, not a street urchin. He stood nervously at the door until Styx guided him in. Bear looked at the boy. He wasn't a ghost. He was solid and real, and he had stood guard over him. The gruff, tough-as-nails biker felt a lump form in his throat. He couldn't find the words to express the depth of his gratitude, so he just said the most important thing. You stayed, Bear said, his voice thick with emotion. Leo just nodded, his own eyes welling up. You saw me, he whispered back. In that moment, in that sterile hospital room, an unbreakable bond was forged between the broken biker and the boy who had refused to let him be forgotten. The Iron Sentinels held a formal meeting, what they called church, at the clubhouse a week later. Bear was there, out of the hospital and in a wheelchair, but present. Leo was there too, sitting quietly in a corner. The club voted. It was unanimous. They filed for legal guardianship of Leo. A member who was a lawyer handled the paperwork. Another who owned a construction company offered him a part-time job. They weren't just giving him a roof over his head, they were giving him a family. A loud, rough around the edges, fiercely loyal family. The years that followed were a transformation. Leo finished high school, not just scraping by, but with honors. Bear, his leg now healed with a slight limp and a lot of new hardware, was his biggest cheerleader, sitting in the front row at graduation, his booming cheer echoing through the auditorium. The club was there, a line of leather-clad uncles taking up 2 full rows. Leo didn't become a biker. The roar of the engines was the sound of home, but his calling was different. Inspired by the nurses who had helped him and the paramedics who had saved Bear, he enrolled in college, then paramedic school. The club paid for it all, proudly. 7 years after he had slept on the concrete outside St. Jude's, Leo was a certified paramedic. He was tall and confident, his eyes no longer wary and scared, but calm and compassionate. He wore the city's uniform, but on the inside of his jacket, pinned over his heart, was a small silver pin of a knight's helmet crossed by 2 swords, a gift from Bear. The Iron Sentinels had changed too. Inspired by Leo, they had started a foundation, the Sentinels Watch. It was a charity that partnered with local shelters to provide mentorship resources, and scholarships for homeless and at-risk youth. The intimidating motorcycle club had become one of the city's most beloved institutions, their intimidating presence now seen as a shield for the vulnerable. One crisp autumn evening, Leo's unit was called to a minor fender bender. A car had swerved to avoid a dog and clipped a streetlight. No one was seriously hurt, but a young family was shaken. As his partner checked out the driver, Leo saw him. A boy, no older than 10, sitting on the curb a short distance away, his eyes wide with fear, watching the chaos of flashing lights and official-looking adults. He was a ghost on the edge of the scene. Leo walked over. He knelt down, just as Styx had knelt down to him all those years ago. The boy flinched, expecting to be told to move. "Hey there," Leo said, his voice calm and steady. "My name's Leo. It looks a lot scarier than it is." He offered the boy a bottle of water from his kit. "Everyone's going to be okay." The boy took the water, his small hand brushing against Leo's. For the first time, his eyes lost some of their fear, replaced by a flicker of trust. Leo smiled. "You're safe now," he said. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his soul, that the single hot dog, the one small act of seeing a person where others saw nothing, had not just saved him. It had created a ripple of kindness that would continue to spread. A quiet, powerful legacy passed on from a biker to a boy, and now from a man to the next lost soul waiting to be seen.